Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy Note 8 and see how this particular phone holds up in 2025. Now, the big thing I can definitely tell you, in my personal opinion, is that if you are going to go through and if you're about to go ahead and think about buying a Samsung Galaxy Note 8, just know that there are far better options for you to go ahead and buy. And we'll take a look at that throughout this whole entire video. But the Note 8 is still a legendary phone. I still like this phone a lot, and I'm excited to get into it. Number one, if you want to go ahead and pick up some phones that I would recommend buying this year though, links will be down in the description below. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Samsung Galaxy Note 8. This particular phone came out back in 2017. And the thing you have to remember with the Samsung Galaxy Note 8 is that this is one of those types of devices that it was almost ahead of its time. If you're able to go ahead and look at, the Samsung Galaxy Note 8 and other phones that came out in 2017, this phone looked beautiful, right? This was right before, I think, the iPhone 10 came out. So it was right around the same time, but it was right before the main competitor of this thing was probably the iPhone 7 Plus. And when you look at those phones, I mean, it is pretty crazy how good of a job this particular phone was giving you at that time. It was legendary. The front side of this phone, you were getting a 6.3-inch Super AMOLED display. So that in and of itself is just such a cool thing to kind of think about there. Because if you're going to go through and pick up one of these types of phones, well, that in and of itself is such a legendary thing. Because you're able to go through, and so many years later, you're still able to go and get a phone like this that's essentially giving you pretty thin bezels on the top and bottom for like a 8-year-old phone, or 8-year-old phone. Curved displays on it too, and it's a 1440p panel. That is in and of itself such a crazy thing. And like I said, if you're going to go through and like pick up some sort of a device, I genuinely do think that is such an insane thing to kind of think about there. So in my personal opinion, once again, I think that is a super crazy thing to kind of think about, from that perspective. On the bottom, you are getting a USB Type-C port, which is great. You're getting a headphone jack, and you're getting a micro SD card slot as well. Now, having that type of capability and having that type of I/O is really nice. I love having it. And if they're going to go ahead and give me a micro SD card slot and a headphone jack and a micro SD card slot, I will take it. But I will even take just a micro SD card slot. Like, having a micro SD card slot in this particular perspective is so insane. I absolutely love having that type of capability. And I will tell you from that particular situation too, that is in and of itself one of my most favorite types of capabilities to have. So definitely, in my personal opinion, if I'm picking up some sort of a device, I definitely do like having some sort of a device like that that's going to give me some sort of layout in that situation. Now, on top of that, another very big thing is this thing's giving you that stylus. That S Pen is another super cool thing to have. And once again, if I'm going to go through and pick up some sort of a device, having an S Pen like that is so cool and it's so legendary. And I personally do love having a phone that's going to be giving me that type of layout. So I will tell you, from that particular situation, getting a phone like this, I think, is super, super nice with a dual camera setup and wireless charging and all that stuff. With the price tag though, this phone is basically going to be giving you a phone that's essentially going to be very, very cheap to buy. Now, it's a cheap phone to buy because it's an outdated phone. So you have to remember that. If you're going to go through and pick up this type of phone, it's going to be cheaper because it is an older phone and it's an outdated phone. So I don't want to give the impression that this is like a very good value per dollar. That is not the case. This thing went down in value correspondingly to other Samsung phones. But the reason why these things are so dirt cheap now is because these things have gone down in value so much. So that right there is another very important thing to keep in mind there from that particular perspective. Now, on top of that, another big thing to keep in mind here too is that with something like the Samsung Galaxy Note 8, the camera on the back side, it's still actually pretty decent. You're getting a dual camera setup on the back. It's a 12 megapixel wide, then a 12 megapixel telephoto lens. And it's also giving you this dual camera setup on the front side, an 8 megapixel wide and then a 2 megapixel iris, eye scanner. So this type of layout I think is actually pretty decent still. And the fact that this thing had like some sort of a dual camera setup on the front is actually pretty insane. So this thing, by giving you that dual camera setup on the back side, I think is actually a pretty decent touch. So it gives you 4K at 30 on the back. And that's kind of it. Like I said, I don't want to hype up this phone too much. I don't want to tell you like this phone has like a great performing device if it really isn't. But this thing, for the most part, it's pretty decent, right? It's not really that bad. And I do think that is in and of itself, once again, another kind of legendary thing going on for this type of device. So if you're going to go through and pick up a device like this, you have to remember that this phone will get the job done. It can take photos and videos, but it's not really going to be like this amazing, crazy type of experience. It's going to be fairly basic when it kind of comes down to it from the outside. So in today's standards, it's missing out on a lot, but for an older phone, it's actually decent. Now, when it comes down to the software longevity, this is another very big thing to keep in mind here too. Because if you're trying to get the phone that's going to be giving you a longer software experience, this is going to be the biggest problem with the Samsung Galaxy Note 8. The software is already outdated. Even if you buy this phone today or tomorrow or 5 years ago, it probably was already an outdated phone even years ago. So it makes less and less sense to go ahead and buy a phone like this in any capacity. There are significantly better phones to go and buy rather than this type of phone. So if you are going to go through and pick up a phone, I really would not recommend buying this phone, especially from a software perspective. But on top of that, another very big thing to keep in mind here, I keep saying that, is the battery. This thing was giving you a 3300 mAh battery, which back in 2017 was a really good size, was a really big size battery. But in this day and age, that's not quite the case. And like I said, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to go ahead and buy one of these types of phones because you're already getting an outdated device by the time you buy it. So that's kind of what ends up happening here when you're going through and buying these types of devices, because they're already going to be outdated by the time you get them. So once again, I would really hate for you to go through and buy one of these types of devices if it's already outdated, because there are significantly better devices to go and buy from that perspective. So in my personal opinion, if you were going to go through and like pick up a phone, this one is already outdated, doesn't really make too much sense to buy from that perspective. But on top of that, when it kind of comes down to, the performance, this phone was essentially giving you this Qualcomm Snapdragon 835 chipset inside with 6 gigabytes of RAM. And definitely from that RAM perspective, that's really not that terrible of a perspective to have. Like, it definitely not only gets the job done from that RAM side, but it's also a very good performing phone. And, for how old it is, it was a good performing phone. Clearly, this thing is not that great nowadays, but at the time, it actually wasn't that bad of a performing device. And I do think from that particular perspective, once again, if you're going to go through and use one of these types of phones, it is actually in and of itself another really interesting thing to kind of keep in mind there within this type of device. So, in my personal opinion, if you are going to go through and pick up a phone, the performance of this phone wasn't terrible, but even just a few years ago, it really wasn't that bad. But nowadays, it does kind of show its age. And that's kind of the problem that we're into. When I'm looking at something like the Samsung Galaxy Note 8, this phone in a lot of ways, right, does actually hold up kind of well in some ways. But in a lot of other ways, it really doesn't make a lot of sense anymore either. There are a lot of other phones that I would recommend people to buy before they buy this one. I would recommend buying phones like a Samsung Galaxy S23 or a Samsung Galaxy S24 FE or an S24 or iPhone 15 Pro, some of those types of phones. With something like the Samsung Galaxy Note 8, it really doesn't make a lot of sense to go through and buy this type of phone anymore. There's a way better device to go and buy rather than this thing, and I think that's kind of one of the biggest takeaways here. So keep that in mind if you're going to go through and pick up a phone. This is a decent phone, but I think there's way better options to go and pick up rather than this one, in my personal opinion. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.